Hello Booktube, it's the 2nd of October, which means that later on today we will get the result of the Booktube Prize Finals. And so I'm recording this now, earlier in the day, so that I'll be able to schedule it to come up just after the results are announced. And it's my kind of thoughts about the 6 books that were in the final. Will I have picked the winner? Who knows? I'll put something in the comments with my actual reaction to which book won, but you'll know whether I'm happy or not from if you watch this and get my view of all 6. So reading for the Booktube final, obviously there were because I had done the semi-finals, there were 3 books in the final that I'd already read and 3 that were actually new to me because they all happened to be books that I hadn't read outside the Booktube Prize. And they're all books that are worth anyone's time to read, I think, but they definitely fell in 2 halves for me. So there were 3 books that I felt were good books of quality, books with things to recommend them, and 3 books that I thought were exceptional, extraordinary, special books, any of which I would be thrilled if they won. So I'm not going to quite so clearly rank them from 1 to 6 this time, because at this point, by the time I got to the final, I found that really, really hard. I will say which book I chose as my preferred winner, though, and I will talk about the two halves, if that makes sense. So let's go first with my bottom 3. Yeah. But I just need to keep saying, just because they're my bottom 3 doesn't mean that I think they're not good books worth reading, because all six were. My least favourite book maybe was Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. It's a really interesting book about identity, and in particular about how and why a black woman in the South of America in the 1950s would choose still to pass for white because she could, and then the ramifications of that through the rest of her life and the ramifications on her family. So intrinsically an interesting topic, and consciously revisiting Nella Larson's passing, and Brit Bennett acknowledges that. It has really strong characterisation. I've talked about this book before, obviously, because for the previous rounds. It's very strong characterisation. For me, it had just 1 or 2 too many kind of like plot twists or coincidences than it needed, and tried perhaps just a little bit too hard to cover lots of different aspects of identity rather than just sort of sticking with the main theme. But by no means a bad book. It's a good book. Second one that I'd read before was My Dark Vanessa by Kate Russell. Now, this is very much an issue novel. And I think, Kate Russell's quite upfront about that she knew she was writing an issue novel and was hoping to sort of not be seen as jumping on a sort of Me Too movement bandwagon in doing so. So it's about a woman who was, as a child, teenager, drawn into a sexual relationship with her teacher. And what's good about this book, or one of the things that's good about this book, is the way it's structured, with chunks that are in the present and chunks that are in the past, but it's like a moving present, as in, you start, present over time and past over time. So in the beginning of the present bit, you see how she has rationalized and explained to herself what happened, how she perceives it as a kind of loving, sexy, consensual relationship with the teacher. And at the beginning of the, in the past bit, you get to see how he selects her and grooms her and kind of draws her into it, and how the relationship sort of happens, and how he ultimately, in effect, betrays her. And I don't think that's a spoiler, because of the way the book's structured. And then the sort of ongoing present, you get to see how she changes her understanding of what happens, happened to her in the past, and that process. Another of the good things about this book is that it doesn't approach this topic simplistically. You know, the plot and the characters are complex. The Vanessa is not I don't know, a sort of holier than thou victim. She's not, in a way, she's not particularly likable to us. And you can see the charisma of her abuser. He's not a sort of cardboard cutout monster, whilst being dreadful. Yeah. So lots of strengths in the book. I thought it was just perhaps a little bit baggy, slightly overextended. It could have been a better book if it was a little bit crisper. But, you know, by no means a bad book, a good book. Now, the first of the new books that I read this time that falls into my bottom three, as it were, is The Death of Vivek Oji by Kweke Emezi. Emezi's a Nigerian author, and they pack a lot of ideas and emotion into a relatively short book, and I thought The Death of Vivek Oji was quite fresh and contemporary. It's quite a youthful book. I might come back to that sense. The prose style is not, you know, it's not youthful. It's not young adulty. You know, it's mature sort of writing. But yeah, it has a sort of a contemporary feel, although it's set in the sort of at the very end of the 20th century. I like the structure of the book because it hops between time periods, so Vivek's childhood, teenage years, young adulthood, and then after their death. And it hops between people, between Vivek's friends and family, extended family, and closest family, and Vivek's own self after death. Sort of, you know, one of the voices is dead Vivek. If that, yeah, you know what I mean. I like that jumping back and forth. So you get a kind of a mosaic builds up of the events. It's a book about, I suppose, about what it meant to be a queer person in 1990s Nigeria, and that was intrinsically interesting to me. It's also about being mixed race, which Emezi is themselves, so that added another layer. It's a tragic book, but it has a celebratory quality, because Vivek Oji really sets out to fully live and express sort of both aspects of their sort of non-binary identity. And, you know, so that's, something special, I suppose, about the book. Having said that, well, I would say that the strongest characters in the book are the younger generation. And I was really quite interested by the older generation in the book as well, and what I would have liked more about that. I suppose that's what I'm saying about it being quite a youthful book. So part of the mixed race thing is a chunk of the older characters are the group known as the Niger wives. So they're foreign-born wives of Nigerian husbands, and I loved them. I would love to have more of them. I would also have liked to hear more from Vivek's mother, Kavita. I felt like her voice was really important in the book, and she was sometimes perhaps a bit underdeveloped for me. I was slightly underwhelmed by the ending. Yeah, which is perhaps another of the reasons why it's in the bottom three and is not one of my extraordinary top three. But again, not a book that had a lot to interest me in it, and some real strengths, and so, you know, I'm not disrecommending it by any means. So let's move on to the top three. Now then, 2 books in this that were new to me and one that I've known for a long time. And so the one that I've known for, you know, I originally read in 2020 was Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, who's Irish, sort of Northern Irish origin, British writer, a very experienced author, I guess. And Hamnet was one of my top British novels of 2020, without a doubt, possibly my favourite of the British novels that I read, new British novels. And it's imaginative historical fiction about Shakespeare's wife and about marriage and the position of women in 16th, early 17th century, and families and grief and bereavement. A moving book, very rich, lovely prose style. I've talked about it several times before, so I'm not going to say more about it. What I will say is that Hamnet, all through the Booktube Prize, Hamnet's been like the gold standard for me. Everything I've read, that's what I've been measuring up against. It's like, is this better? How does this compare to Hamnet? Is it better or worse than Hamnet? And what was lovely is that finally, in reading for the final, I came across two books that absolutely matched up to Hamnet in quality for me. So that was a real thrill. And I'm going to talk about both of them, but not in a particular order, as it were. So those two books were The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickles and Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stewart. The Prettiest Star, let's start with that. The Prettiest Star is one of the most emotional reading experiences I've had in the last 12 months. You know, I went through large chunks of this book with a little, tear in the corner of my eye. It was a very, not a sentimental book, but a really, really gutsy, emotional read for me. It's set in the 1980s. It's a young gay man from small town Ohio, and he's took himself off to New York to kind of be able to sort of be his full self. And while he's there, you hear that he's found joy and belonging and love and fun and all of that. But he also finds HIV and AIDS and bereavement and then sickness himself. And the story basically is him coming home because he knows he's dying. Now, this was a book that always had the potential to really touch me because the main character is basically the same age as me, like 2 years older, I think. The 1980s was, it was like that time was my time too. At that point, I was a kind of student activist and got involved quite a bit in like AIDS education work and health promotion around that, particularly with one particular gay friend. We worked together on that. So this is a topic, I suppose, close to my heart. But it's the kind of theme that could be done really badly. And actually, this book used that theme to say a lot more, I suppose, particularly about family, I think, and about blood family and acquired family. And who's there for you, and how people respond to crisis and prejudice. Which way they jump in that situation. The majority of the book is told in the first person. So we get Brian, the main character, we get first person narrative from him in the form of video diaries, which is a interesting device. Then we get his mother, Sharon, and his sister, Jess, are first person, in the head narratives. But it's that sandwich between two third person brief third person chunks, one from Brian at the beginning of the book in New York and like making the choice to go back to Ohio and back to home, as it were, a home that he left because he wasn't comfortable there, so complicated. And then there's another third person section at the end, which is kind of gives us a perspective from Brian's father. Now, the strength of this book is around the characterization, I'd say. I mean, the style is fine. It's, it's beautifully written. It's nice. There's nothing jarring or, but the actual prose is not the thing that jumps out at you. What jumps out at you is the characters, particularly Sharon and Jess. But also it's a multi-generational book, and Letty, the grandmother, is a glorious character. She's perhaps, she's like the heart of the book, I suppose. But another peripheral characters like Brian's friend Annie. I mean, I could go on, and I won't. But I think Brian coming home, dying of AIDS, basically detonates a bomb in the lives of his family, and then you have all the sort of the fallout from that in really thoughtful ways, and you see how people move and progress in their response, and grow or shrink in different ways. Tremendous sense of place in this book. The New York scenes are very vivid, very colourful, very, and joyful or tragic, that both. But it's small town Ohio that really kind of got me, because that I'm somewhere I know nothing about. It's like a town in the foothills of the Appalachians. It's a place that's had its heart ripped out by the decline of the coal industry. It's the kind of America where people characterize their neighbors by which church they attend. I can't imagine that in the south of England. It just wouldn't happen. I'd have no idea. Yeah. And it's all different varieties of Christianity, and that becomes sort of what is a Christian response becomes key in the book. So there's a lot of moral thinking in this book, I suppose, about hypocrisy and prejudice. It's also the kind of America where people, it's not just that cliche about, lots of Americans don't have passports. This is the kind of place where lots of people haven't even been out of their home state. They've barely even explored the whole of their home state, let alone the rest of America, let alone the world. And that's kind of American that I would never meet, because they don't make it to visit Europe or whatever. I think that's where Carter Sickles grew up, and so they were able to make it very vivid for me. As I said, this is a very emotional story, but not a sentimental one. And the only duff note in the whole book for me was the very last section. And I understand why Carter Sickles put that there. It's almost like a prose poem, and I can see what it's for, but it didn't work for me. But it was just such a little bit at the end that it didn't spoil the book. So the other magic, extraordinary, wonderful new book that I read, that's in my top 3, is Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stewart. Now, I'd heard so many good things about this book, and I was almost worried that I might find it disappointing when people that I love and whose opinion I respect have enthused about it so much. But it completely lived up to, or actually exceeded my expectations, I would say. And funnily enough, it is another book about a gay man who is from, this is interesting, is from sort of not sort of posh, middle class, intellectual, educated sort of, that we often get in perhaps British fiction about gay men. This is like, we're talking with both these books about sort of working class background men, which, added an element for me, I guess. Again, from quite an insular, restricted community, but Douglas Stewart is Scottish, and this is a book set in the city of Glasgow, in sort of deprived neighbourhoods in the city itself, and then in an even more depressingly deprived and limited village on the outskirts of Glasgow that lost its heart again through the loss of the coal industry. So it used to be a mining village, and the mines basically closed. It's again a book about family, but this is a book more about sexuality, but also like really about how can you survive or escape a very difficult childhood and family background. You know, it's alcoholism and poverty, and but also kind of resilience and strength and joy. It's a tragic book that is also a joyful book, because although the book is called Shuggie Bain, this is really the story of Shuggie Bain's mother, Agnes. Wonderful, gorgeous, beautiful, desperate, mercurial, extraordinary, and yet selfish and disastrous Agnes. She's the centre of the book, I guess. It's a book that combines the political and the personal, which I guess is true of several of the books on this in this final sort of six. But in a way that's not at all, you know, oh, it's not like this is my message. It's just built into the book that it really makes you think about the impact of certain sort of economic and political decisions on a poor child in Glasgow. Structure is more straightforward. It starts in the 1990s. It then goes back to Shuggie Bain's early childhood, and kind of, so a lot of it is again set in the 1980s, and we get little episodes from his childhood and teenage years, so that we sort of kind of follow through his life, but not all of it. You know, we kind of dip in for a bit and then out again, and things have moved on and things have changed, and then things have gone back, perhaps got worse again. You know, you get optimism and yeah, a roller coaster, I guess. This is a book that is about, it's a book of substance that is predominantly about characters rather than style. Again, you know, the style is unflashy, I suppose, you know, relatively straight down the line, but well done. But why you love the book is because of the people in it, and the world that it creates, and the emotional world that it creates. So how on earth to choose between those three books for me almost defeated me. Ultimately, I went with my heart on this in terms of how I ranked them for the prize, because I loved all three. I'm actually passionate about all three, as you can tell from this review. But I feel like Hamnet and Shuggie Bain have had, you know, that recognition of winning big prizes and so on. And I feel that Prettiest Star hasn't had the attention that I think it deserves, perhaps, although it's, you know, it's certainly been well thought of and well reviewed and well read. So my fingers crossed are for the Prettiest Star and Carter Sickles to win this prize. But we'll see later on today, and then you'll know by the time you watch this.